Hi, I'm Steve Jones, Chief Judge of JAGIN, the Jaguar Association of Greater Indiana. And our leadership team would like to share with you some concerns we have about what we believe is a lack of clarity in the rule book around the issue of judge certification, more specifically the renewal of certification by already certified judges. To do that, then we want to briefly review the 2023 rules with you, talk about what we believe are the sources of confusion, explain how we did our training this past year in 2023, get into why were we disqualified. That is, our judges were disqualified and our scores to our concours were all voided by JCNA. And we're not the only ones in this situation. South Arizona had the same thing happen to them. Then we want to talk a little bit about the rule changes upcoming for 2024 and those proposed for 2025. And then we want to offer a few suggestions. Okay, now, so to get into the rules, probably the easiest way to see that is to look at the PowerPoint that's used in the judges school. And the first section is on the judging requirement. And for certification, it's the first bullet point there says, okay, a candidate must undergo training like this session. Now, these PowerPoints, this deck is written assuming that the audience is actually a judge's school. Okay, so the candidate here that's looking at this is assumed to be attending an actual judge's school as we define it. And I'll show you that definition here in a little bit. Okay, the candidate then must also take and pass the current judge's test. It's encouraged that that be done at the judge's school, but it doesn't have to occur there. The candidate then has to serve as an apprentice and so forth. All right, now in the next slide, judge currency. Now this gets to the issue of how does an already certified judge maintain their current status or their current certification. And here it says in the second bullet point that the judge must receive an annual briefing on rulebook changes. And then it says parenthetically, this is one reason you are here today. Now, so again, this is assuming that this slide is being viewed at a judge's school. The rules, as I'll show you, the rule book, that is, as I'll show you in a moment, it gets a little more specific here and indicates that, okay, this briefing doesn't have to be at the judge's school. It could occur by alternative means, which obviously is going to be necessary given that you're going to have some of your certified judges who aren't going to be able to attend your judge's school. Then, of course, the certified judge has to take and pass the judge's exam at least once every 3 years. So in terms of the sections of the rule book that deal with judges certification, that is here under Chapter 3, Section D, Part 2. And here it not only indicates that one needs to take and pass the test, but also one needs to attend, that is, a candidate needs to attend a judge's school. And as I'll explain here in a minute, by showing you the rule, a judge's school has to occur by the 2023 rules at least 2 weeks prior to the concours event itself. Okay, now in terms of maintaining judging currency, as it says here under Part 4 of the same section, here's where it states that, okay, all judges must receive annual briefings and or correspondence, okay? So now this could occur at a judge's school, as I just mentioned, but it doesn't have to, as it elaborates on in the next paragraph, okay? And so the chief judge basically needs to provide that briefing or an alternative briefing to the judge's school if necessary, and that alternative briefing, in terms of timing, all it says is it has to be prior to the event, as I have bolded here in the third line down in that paragraph. Okay, so now what prior to the event means is not entirely clear, quite frankly, and that might seem sort of silly or a technical point, but I think it ended up being an issue in our disqualification. Now, also here in this paragraph, the very last sentence is a source of confusion in our view. The sentence it reads, okay, a pre-concourse judge briefing at the event does not satisfy the intent of the judge's school. Okay, well, I mean, that, again, the purpose of that sentence is not clear because, first of all, the judge's school, as you'll see here in a moment, has to be at least 2 weeks prior to the event by the 2023 rules. So how a briefing at the event would be the same thing or could be confused as the same thing isn't clear. Now, is this referring to, when it says pre-concourse briefing, is this referring to the briefing up here in the first sentence of this subpart B? More likely, I think what this is intended to clarify is the pre-concourse judge meeting, okay, and the term meeting is actually used under section H of this chapter, as I'll show you in a minute. That meeting that occurs immediately prior to the start of judging, so it's an organizational meeting that the chief judge has with the judges right before they all walk out onto the field to conduct the judging. It appears more likely that's what this is meant to refer to, okay, especially when it says at the event, okay, and that doesn't satisfy the intent of either the school or, for that matter, the briefing, okay? But the briefing is still an alternative to the school for the already certified judges, okay? Now, also mentioned here under this, under part 4 is the idea that the judge, an already certified judge, has to take and pass the test once every 3 years. Now, this pre-concourse meeting that I just mentioned, okay, that's spelled out in section H. And again, this is basically the meeting where the chief judge would announce judging assignments and review the procedures for the day, and so forth. Now, the judge's school, which as I've mentioned before, that's covered under section C of chapter 3, part 3, subpart B. And here it indicates, and this is under chief judge's responsibilities, that that the judge's school, okay, needs to occur at least 2 weeks prior to the event. And again, this is 2023 rules. That's going to change to 30 days with the 2024 rules. Also mentioned there under that section is the idea that the chief judge is responsible for holding that pre-concourse meeting that is mentioned up here under part H. Okay, so where does the confusion come in? Well, I think I've already explained some of it, but I've written some of it down here for those that want to try to follow that maybe a little bit more closely and refer back to the rules. And I've highlighted that part. But I also want to emphasize that, you know, we've identified here 3 distinct sources of training associated with a concourse event. Okay, number 1 is the judging school, okay, which again, by the 2023 rules has to be at least 2 weeks prior to the event. Number 2 is the briefing and/or correspondence, which satisfies training for already certified judges, and that is only required to occur prior to the event. Although, again, what prior to the event means is not entirely clear. And again, that may seem like a technical point, but it appears to cause an issue for us. And then 3 is that pre-concourse judges meeting, okay, that we just talked about. All right, now, what did we do in our training this past year in preparation for our concourse? We held a judges school on May 6th, 4 weeks prior to our event. Okay, we held a briefing for the judges who could not attend the school on June 2nd, on a Friday, the day before our concourse event, which was June 3rd. And on June 3rd, immediately prior to the start of judging, we held the judges meeting. Okay, and again, I think that the terms school briefing meeting, I'm going to try to use consistently from here on in order to clarify the distinction between these 3 forms of training. Okay, now where did we get in trouble here? Okay, well, again, I would suggest that there's a misunderstanding here between ourselves and the concourse committee chair, as well as the chief judge for JCNA, about One, this sentence that I've already highlighted about a pre-concours judge briefing. And then also this issue of when does a judging school have to occur appears to be another source of confusion. And then finally, as you'll see in the email exchange I'll share with you here in a minute, this rule from Chapter 1 was introduced into this discussion, I'll call it. And I'll come back to that here in a minute. But basically, after our scores were all submitted, Jim informed us, Jim Sambolt, the concourse committee chair, that we had a couple minor issues and then we had a major issue. And the major issue number 3 here I've highlighted, and he refers to this as Rulebook 3.5. It's actually Part 4, and it's that subpart B that I've shared with you already. And Jim, you can see here is underlined that last sentence where he says a pre-concourse judge briefing at the event does not satisfy the intent of the school. Okay, and he goes on here then to write, and I've highlighted this, there are 6 judges that do not qualify at your judge as their judging school date is the same day as the day of the event. Okay, he goes on then to say that the concourse event was June 2nd, and the following judges are therefore disqualified because their training was June 2nd. Well, our concourse event was not June 2nd, it was June 3rd. But the misunderstanding arises from the fact that our local concourse chair had entered the dates for our event on the JCNA website as June 2nd and 3rd, because on the 2nd, which was a Friday, that evening we held a reception for out-of-town participants. So when I first read this response from Jim, I thought, oh, he thinks we actually did the judging on June 2nd, and in which case he would have a point. Okay, but basically, I explained that then in a response to Jim, and he came back and basically said that having the school, he still calls it, okay, a judge's training school being held on Friday, June 2nd, and the concourse event on Saturday, June 3rd still presents a major problem and a violation of the rule book that has been in effect for years. Okay, now, how is this a violation of the rule book? We held our school on May 6th. We did a briefing on June 2nd. We didn't do the school on June 2nd. And the briefing again is allowed and in fact, it's an alternative form of training, but of course it's only for the already certified judges. But the judges we're talking about here that Jim disqualified were already previously certified judges. All they were doing was trying to maintain their quote unquote judging currency by attending that briefing with me the day before our concourse. Okay. Now, Jim also then here cited this subpart G from Chapter 1, and I'll share that with you real quick. This says if the judge's status must be updated to conform to sanction requirements, must be updated at least 30 days prior. Okay, now that didn't, in my view, I mean, we had done that according to the rules. I mean, I think that rule is intended for clubs to keep their judges roster up to date in terms of the training date and the test date. So if we take a quick look here at our judges roster or list, as it's called here on the JCNA website, you can see here that for each judge, you've got a test date to enter, and you can see that the 4 judges here passed the test a couple years ago. So I think they'll all have to take it this coming year. And then the training date, you can see that, well, 3 of the judges had their training on May 6th, which was our judging school. And then the first judge, Mark Smith, was not able to attend the judges school because he was out of town on business. So I did a briefing with him and several other judges then on Friday, June 2nd, the day before our event, as I already explained. Okay, so basically, I responded to Jim indicating that In my view, we had not violated this rule that he brought up from chapter 1 and explained why I thought nor had we violated the rule from chapter 3 about the briefing prior to the event. Since these judges were already certified, they didn't have to attend a judge's school. He came back then and cited, he did confirm my understanding of that rule from chapter 1. He does this in the paragraph, highlighted paragraph there in the center. Up above, though, he says, well, additional rules that he needs to make us aware of that he, I guess, feels we violated relate to the idea of, okay, the judge's school having to be 2 weeks prior. Okay, so he mentions that here, and I've highlighted that. Now, again, why he mentions that, I'm not sure. Because again, we did the judge's school 4 weeks prior. The only way I can understand this is he's confusing the briefing with the school. Okay. So I wrote a long email to Jim trying to clear this all up, and citing rules. And basically he came back and said, okay, basically for what he calls a lack of reasonable adherence to the required written procedure, his decision to disqualify us is going to stand. Now, he does mention here that the rule violation has nothing to do with delayed reporting. It is true that we reported some results late because the initial reporting was not saved by the system. And I thought maybe he was aggravated with us about that, and he was, but he says that's not the reason for the disqualification. The reason for the disqualification is the rule violation. But, I responded, I said, well, what rule violation? I said, okay, fine, but you haven't addressed any of the points I raised about the 2 rules in question from chapter 3. Okay. The only way I can understand his reasoning here for disqualifying us is if we come back up to this idea of when we had our event. Okay, he's saying that we basically that our event started on June 2nd, on Friday. And therefore, since we did the briefing on that same day, June 2nd, that the briefing didn't occur prior to the event. Okay, that's the only way I can understand the basis for his disqualification of our event. Whereas, again, now this gets back to the point that I had made earlier, where if we go back to this rule about what does it mean to say that the briefing should occur prior to the event. Okay, well, prior to the event, I thought meant, well, okay, well, the day before would be all right. But again, if we're saying the event started the day before because we had a reception for out-of-towners the day before, that's the only basis on which I can understand why we were disqualified. Okay, now that said, I mean, he never really spelled that out. Okay, so this whole thing is just sort of a mystery to us, quite frankly, as to why we were disqualified. And I bring this up because South Arizona is in the same situation. They were disqualified, they think, because of that rule from chapter 1 that I mentioned. That's the best they can understand from the email exchanges they've had with Jim. But they're not certain. Okay. Now at this point, I reached out to Hal Kritzman, who's the JCNA chief judge, to try to clarify this. And basically I asked Hal for a phone call, which he granted, and we talked for about an hour and really didn't make much progress because it is difficult to talk about these rules in a phone conversation unless you're both sort of sitting there next to each other looking at the rule book, which is one reason why I'm making this video. Okay, so I thought, well, I'm going to write all this down in an email, and I'm going to copy the executive committee and our regional directors and get this thing behind us. But that was really to no avail. Hal never responded to this email that I wrote, which was quite lengthy. as you can see here, where I went into great detail and cited all the relevant rules. The only person who reached out to us from the board was our regional director, okay, Gary Cunningham, who did say that he would take our case to the board. Okay. The next thing we heard a few weeks later in mid-December was that the board had heard our appeal and rejected it. Okay, now exactly what that entailed, we don't know. All we know is that we were never given a chance to make our case to anybody other than those emails that I wrote. Okay, so, you know, it appears here from what we can tell that basically the concourse committee chair and the JCNA chief judge basically were judge, jury, and executioner, and that there doesn't appear to be any real process for appealing a disqualification such as this. Or for that matter, we can't even get an explanation for what we did wrong. And so, you know, we're frustrated about this. The chief judge of the South Arizona Club is so frustrated that he resigned from JCNA over it. And you know, I think that these issues have to be clarified. Okay, now let me also then talk a little bit about what's coming up. Okay, in 2024, that 2-week rule on the judges' school changed to 30 days prior required. Okay, also in 2024, they're taking that section out of Chapter 1 that I referenced, and they're moving it to Chapter 3. Now, what this is going to imply, okay, by moving it from 1 to 3 is not clear. We don't see the purpose of this. Hopefully, it's not meant to suggest that all training has to be done 30 days prior to the event. Okay, because it is saying it depends really on how one interprets the idea of the judge's status must be updated. Okay, now also what will be proposed at the AGM for 2025 then are several more changes related to certification. One will be that the chief judge will have to update the judge's roster at least 2 weeks prior to the event, which means that basically anyone who has to take the test will have to complete it at least 2 weeks prior to the event. Also, every judge will have to take and pass the judge's test every year. Okay, that's going to be proposed. And then finally, certified judges will need to attend a judge's school at least once every 3 years. Okay, so what are our suggestions? Well, our suggestions would be one, I mean, we challenge the idea of moving that rule from Chapter 1 to Chapter 3. Don't see the purpose in that. I think it just is liable to create more confusion. Two, we propose tabling all changes pertaining to judges' certification, proposed changes, that is, until we have clarification on terminology and the terminology is made consistent. And then 3, we propose changing the rule on the judges' school, the timing of it, back to the previous language so that it only has to be 2 weeks prior rather than 30 days, although again, that can't be done until the following year, given that it's not on the agenda for the 2024 AGM. So with that, I appreciate your attention and welcome any comments you might have on this video. Thank you.